Begin transmission. Nights here are generally warm and fairly pleasant. Last evening we caught this amazing little kiwi bird on camera, so sometimes nights are filled with delightful experiences, but oftentimes the nights are filled with strange, somewhat terrifying sounds and unusual noises and things we can't quite explain. And many of us are actually quite fearful of the forest at night. There's just something that seems deep in our souls that seems a little bit terrified of those woods after darkness falls. Especially Dave. Dave just a long time ago refused to do any work outside after the sun set. Which, I mean, I can't blame him. A few weeks ago he had a very terrifying experience at night. He was doing some work on the habitats. The sun went down, and in the woods behind him, in this murky, inky blackness, he heard this terrifying shrill scream, and we didn't know what kind of creature it was, but it sent Dave scurrying back inside with just completely pale face, blood drained from his face, just completely terrified of something in the woods. So he went out and investigated, and we set out a recorder so we could hear the sounds. And when I heard this creature, it was pretty terrifying. So I'm going to play the sound for you here, and just to kind of get the whole experience, just imagine that you're in the woods, deep woods, darkness, it's just you're by yourself, you're far from home, you have no idea what kind of creatures there might be out there. You don't know if they want to slurp your blood or crush your skull or lay eggs in your neck. You just don't know what kind of creatures are out here. So imagine that dark forest, and you hear this sound. Terrifying, right? That was a horrific sound to hear right behind you in the woods, somewhat above you, lurking in the trees. But even though it's a terrifying sound, it turned out to be just a very small creature, a predatory creature, but someone that's not interested in predating on us. Rather, they like eating little mice that scurry around the forest floor. This was a screech owl giving its hunting call. Terrifying creature, but a little bit of a kind, sassy face there. So screech owls are one of the most terrifying night creatures. They don't look very terrifying. In contrast, if you saw this next one that I'm going to show you, and then heard it, this would be even more terrifying. This creepy looking bird is called a patu, and fairly rare, and during the day they are just camouflaged like a little bit of a log, and you don't even notice them. But at night, they sometimes during the day, but mostly at night, they call to each other with these eerie vocalizations. Another creepy one comes from the shearwater, and shearwaters just look like normal kind of birds, but they have a very haunting, eerie melody that they sing to each other at night. So this is the kind of forest that we hang out in, and so all kinds of interesting sounds. One of the most fascinating ones is actually the lyre bird. and it makes sounds that are kind of typical of your every bird to call for mates or to defend its territory. But this is an incredible bird that mimics other birds, so it adds a whole lot of other bird songs into its repertoire to sing out. And so we eventually started playing human noises from, we have a big database of sounds, so we just fed it a bunch of random sounds and it picked up on a lot of them. So here it is just kind of singing in its normal way, like a little bird. But then next, it's going to mimic another local bird species, the kookaburra, which kind of sounds like it's laughing. And it can mimic over 20 different species in this local area, and not only just the species, but also some of the artificial sounds that we gave it. So this is a camera click. And then the next one is a camera with a little whirring motor. And this is a bird. This is all a bird. What a bird is making this with its own voice. And then it can even mimic a car alarm. Which is pretty remarkable. And the most remarkable thing it can do is it can mimic the start of a chainsaw. Really is that bird doing that. That bird is making those sounds. It seems unbelievable. And then the last one I want to show you is this lyrebird can also sing some really complex melodies in its songs. Remarkable, right? It can sing complex melodies and tunes. So the lyrebird is a remarkable mimic. Screech owl terrifies us. The patu and the shearwater have some haunting, eerie looks and sounds. But the night air is filled with sounds of birds. And so last time we talked about birds and how most of their anatomy and physiology is kind of adapted for flight, and we ended with their digestive system. So today we'll pick up on their circulatory system and the respiratory system and finish with a discussion of the reproductive behavior, and which is going to include a lot of these really remarkable songs. But adding onto their songs, they're going to start doing some dances, which is also pretty remarkable. The circulatory system and respiratory system of barred geese is so efficient that they can extract oxygen and transport it to their body even when they're flying above mountain ranges. So they can fly over the Himalayas, where it's so high that an oxygen mask would be needed for basically all other organisms, but they are so efficient in the respiration and in circulation that they can still extract and deliver oxygen at incredibly low concentration levels in the not upper atmosphere, but high atmosphere. I don't know atmospheres, but they're way up there. And just like mammals, they're going to have a double circulatory system with a pulmonary circuit and a systemic circuit. And just like mammals, they're going to have very strong ventricular walls for pumping and for maintaining very high blood pressure. So we talked about this before, but you should be able to trace the flow of blood from the lungs back to the lungs and tell me where it's oxygenated and where it is deoxygenated. So blood picks up oxygen from the lungs, and then it's going to flow into the left atria of the heart, and then the left ventricle is going to pump that oxygenated blood throughout the whole body, where oxygen will be used, and then the deoxygenated blood will return to the heart via the right atrium, and then the right ventricle will pump the blood to the pulmonary circuit. Now, when you do a cross-section, this looks symmetrical, but this is actually not symmetrical. This is the muscle wall, and which ventricle will have thicker muscles? The left ventricle, because the left ventricle has to pump the blood throughout the whole body, and the right ventricle has to only pump the blood to the lungs, which are usually right next door. So the left ventricle is usually significantly thicker, more powerful, maintains high blood pressure. Now, the respiratory system of birds is one of their most amazing superpowers. It is the most efficient respiratory system in all of nature, and it's very, very strange when you think about it. I think most of us kind of have a mammal-centric view of respiration, and we think about lungs, so even imagining respiration with gills is somewhat difficult. But birds, they have internal lungs, but they have these extra little air sacs scattered throughout their body. And these air sacs are kind of holding cells for extra air. And there's a whole lot of them, and they sometimes even extend into the interior of the bones. So I mentioned that the bones are often hollow inside. Well, they're often filled with these air sacs full of oxygenated air. And so what happens here is a little bit complicated, but when the bird takes their first breath, the air goes into these posterior air sacs for storage. And then it's going to slowly diffuse through the lungs. But the lungs don't have alveoli. Instead, they have these long parallel tubes called parabronchi. And the parabronchi is where most of the gas exchange is going to occur. So the air goes from the mouth to the posterior air sacs and then slowly diffuses across the parabronchi into the anterior air sacs. And once they're in the anterior air sacs, then when the next gulp of air comes in, this gets pushed out the bird's mouth. So it takes 2 breathing cycles for a single breath to kind of go all the way through the system. And what makes this the most efficient system is that the parabronchi basically always have air passing through them. So there's never a take a breath and then exhale a breath. There's basically always breathing. So here's a good visualization of that. First of all, if you look at the human, this is what we're familiar with, right? You breathe in, you breathe out, and here the yellow is oxygenated blood and the red is kind of carbon dioxide. Not blood, oxygen versus carbon dioxide. So the human breathes in and then breathes out, and then there's a gap, right, where our body doesn't have air, and we just do that every however long we breathe, but we do this a lot. In the chicken, who's a much more efficient respirator, the oxygen goes into the posterior air sacs and slowly diffuses across the parabronchi into the anterior air sacs and then zips out the mouth, and then another breath immediately comes in. And so because the parabronchi are a place of kind of slow diffusion, you kind of have a constant exchange of oxygen in the parabronchi all the time. So that makes a very amazingly efficient respiration system. In excretion, you're not going to want to hang on to waste if you're a bird, right? Birds are just all about eliminating extra weight. And so you're not going to have a large intestine. You're not going to have a large intestine. There's not going to be a rectum for storing waste, and most birds don't even have a sphincter on their anus, so they don't hold onto their waste. Once it's filled, it's just eliminated immediately. So if you ever try to house train a pet bird or a duck, you're going to have a very difficult time because they don't really control when and where they excrete waste. The bladder, they also don't have a bladder, right? So they're not going to store urine either. They have pretty efficient kidneys called metanephric kidneys, and these kidneys have nephrons, which are little multiple little sections that all filter the blood, and the nephrons are the site of something called glomerular filtration. This is what mammals do much more efficiently than birds do, actually. But this is, for our purposes, it gets pretty complicated, but all I want you to know here is that this is where the blood gets filtered for waste. The nephrons are the site of glomerular filtration and where ammonia is converted into uric acid. The uric acid combines with the solid waste in the cloaca and just is eliminated. In saltwater birds, you're going to have extra salt in the water and in their environment, so also in their bodies. And so to get rid of extra salt, you're going to have special salt glands right in their forehead. And so sometimes when you see a seagull crying, it's just because it's thought of something really sad, but sometimes it's just trying to secrete too much salt in his blood. Flight requires an ability to process visual information incredibly rapidly, and so all the parts of the brain that are responsible for seeing the environment and integrating that sensory visual information are going to be greatly complex in birds. So this is going to include the cerebellum, the optic lobe, and the cerebral cortex. All three of these things do a whole host of other things as well, but for us, I just wanted you to focus on their visual acuity. So great complexity in the parts of the brain that are responsible for vision. Hearing is also pretty important for birds, and they can hear in about the same range that a human can. And if you can probably infer this, right? Because most of them sing, they make noise. So if something makes a lot of noise, it's going to be, you can infer pretty easily that hearing is important for its life. So hearing and seeing are going to be the two most important senses for birds. Touch and smell aren't very important. Smell is important in some animals like vultures. They're going to rely on their sense of smell to find their decomposing food. The eyes of a bird are pretty similar to the eyes of mammals and even the eyes of a squid that we talked about. It's going to have a lens that will concentrate the light, cornea to protect the light, iris to kind of, I should say the iris kind of concentrates the light, because the iris has a muscle that can dilate or contract, and that determines how much light enters the lens. And then the lens is going to focus the light on the retina back here, and the retina is full of different things called cones and rods. And rods are cells that are really sensitive to black and white, and so they're really important for night vision. And then cones are kind of the color cells of the retina, and so if you're a diurnal species, you're going to have more cones than rods, but if you're an owl, which are primarily active at night, there's going to be more rods than cones. The pecten is unique to birds' eyes. So the pecten kind of intrudes into the vitreous humor here and supplies it with extra levels of oxygen and nutrients. And that's pretty different than mammalian eyes. The reproductive system is also going to be adapted for flight in that it's going to be heavily reduced. So in males, there's usually no extrusible penis or any kind of calculatory organ, a hemipenis like in reptiles or anything. There are a few species that do, notably ducks do have penises, but only during the breeding season. And after the breeding season, after mating has happened, their penises all fall off and they go back to normal. So that's kind of, that's the trend. During breeding season, reproductive organs develop. So even in other birds, not ducks, their testes, in the males, the testes are very underdeveloped until the breeding season, and then they'll grow about 300 times their normal size, and then after breeding season is done, they will then atrophy back to very, very small size. So there are one way the reproductive system is adapted for flight is kind of seasonal weight control. So you only have this extra weight for reproduction when you're actually going to be reproducing. In females only have usually one half of their reproductive system matures. Usually the left half and the right half atrophies. So you only have one ovary, one oviduct, etc. So this eliminates a lot of the extra weight that is somewhat unnecessary. So during mating, because there's not an extensible reproductive organ, the males and females just have to transfer sperm via the cloaca, a little cloacal kiss, and then the eggs are fertilized usually in the oviduct, and then the uterus applies a shell, and then the shelled eggs are laid. Usually there's a parental care. Usually males and females take care of the developing eggs and young. To do this, there are several different ways that birds interact with each other and with their young. So there are three we'll talk about here: monogamy, polygyny, and polyandry. Monogamy is when you have a mate that pair bonds for life in There are two kinds of monogamy. One is pair bonding for life, and this is seen in birds like albatross, which they'll find a mate and then they'll nest together every year, and every year they form this really fantastic bond that will last as long as the birds live. So it's sometimes 40 or 50 years they will return to the same place with the same mate at the same time to lay eggs. During most of their life, they're off in the sea fishing and hunting, and so they don't spend a lot of time together until the breeding season. But if one returns, they'll wait for sometimes the whole season for their mate. They won't find a new mate, so they're kind of loyal to their mate for life. When one of their mates dies, then they will often never mate again. So this is kind of an extreme version of monogamy found in albatross. There's another version of monogamy where it's monogamy per breeding season. So a male and female will be monogamous per year, but the next year all bets are off and you get to choose again. But once you've chosen, you're monogamous with that mate as long as you're raising kids together. Another way to do this is having one, either a male or a female with multiple males or females. And polygyny is definitely the most common. This is a single male with who mates with a whole lot of females, and this usually has some characteristic behaviors and morphology associated with it. Usually the males are going to be in competition for mates, and the females choose which male they prefer. And so this usually ends with one dominant male or a few dominant males with harems of multiple females. And why is this, biologically speaking, the most common? It's because the male's biological contribution to reproduction is fairly small, right? And the female's is relatively large. She has to make the eggs and incubate the eggs for a while. Once the eggs are born, then biologically both parents have equal kind of investment. And so oftentimes once the eggs are born, you have both males and females providing for the young. The opposite of this is polyandry, where you have one female and multiple males. This occurs in a few species, like this little jacana bird, which is a little shore bird in marshy areas. And jacana birds, so what can you infer about the jacana bird female morphology by knowing that it's polyandrous and the behavior of this bird in general? Well, quite easily you can infer that the females are going to be brightly colored, and they're going to be in competition for mates rather than the males. And so in most bird species, the males are brightly colored and the females are rather drab. It's the opposite in the jacana bird, and the jacana bird will actually, the females will fight for territory and mates. They have special spurs on the back of their legs that they use to slash each other with. But how's the actual taking care of the young work? Well, the way this works, if you have multiple male mates and the biological cost is in taking care of them, then you can kind of infer that the female mates and lays an egg and then abandons that egg. And then the male bird abandons the egg to the male bird's care and then goes and mates with another male. And so you end up with a female guarding a fairly large territory and a bunch of single males taking care of her offspring. So it's kind of the same idea but switched. And so I think that whatever kind of the result is, you should be able to infer morphology and behavior corresponding to that mating preference. Now when they pick mates, because there's so much competition, you have seen we've seen some really elaborate selectional pressure and some really complex creations and dances and songs. This is one of my favorites. This is a creation made by bower birds, and they make what's called bowers. So if you stumbled upon this in the woods, you would definitely not think that a bird made this. You would think a human made this, right? Actually, I couldn't even make something this nice. But each of these little sticks has been carefully picked, placed, and crafted to make this little home. And then they've gone out and collected a whole lot of different fruit and seeds and then organize them by size and color. And so you're creating kind of a appealing visual display and kind of proving your worth to the female. The female will then come And here's another little bowerbird, a female checking out the little display he's made. And then oftentimes this is accompanied, once you have attracted the attention of a female, you do a fantastic little dance. Beautiful. He's got a little berry in his mouth or something. And if the female is impressed, she'll mate with you. If she's unimpressed, she will move on to the next bower. All that work will be for naught. Here's one of my favorites. This little guy has a very peculiar dance and really stark, bright blue markings. So dancing gets pretty elaborate in birds. Birds also often form something called leks, where you'll have a bunch of males all in the same area that kind of stake out territory and guard it, and then they all perform mating dances at roughly the same time. And this is basically a little male marketplace where the females will kind of stroll through and watch the little males do their performance and then choose the ones they think are best. So these are our ruffled grouse, and they have special pouches on their throats that will inflate when they make songs. They do this funny little dance. And then you have other species of grouse that do a dance like this. And what's really interesting about this is they have to practice this, and they practice this for days and weeks and months. And even young, and so young birds are not really very good at this, and the old birds are very good at this. And the old birds also know where the best location is and where the best territory is. And so you just kind of have this this really interesting cycle where the most fit animals are going to be the oldest, most mature, the ones who are most capable of finding food, and therefore the females are attracted to those more than the young, immature ones that don't really know what they're doing yet. But as the young mature and get older, the ones that survive figure it out, and they become eventually the older, mature ones with all the mates. So it's a pretty interesting practice. It's an interesting process, and it's fascinating that they have to practice these dances. It's not something that necessarily comes instinctually. All right, now once the eggs are laid and the young hatch, you have two different kinds of development. You have altricial young and precocial young. And look at this picture. What is this picture? These are little baby finch, and their mouths look like they have flashlights in them. They're very, very strange. Why is this the case? We actually don't know for sure, but I think it has to do with allowing the parents to be able to quickly find the mouth of the young in dark nest cavities or at night. So these little beacons, the parent just knows immediately exactly what mouth to feed and when. Because when the mouth is closed, you don't see anything. When the mouth is open, you see these nice 4 shining blue lights and this white and black polka dot place, and you can put the food right in the mouth. These are altricial young. They are born often without any feathers and just completely helpless, eyes still closed, and completely reliant on their parents for food and protection. So altricial young are very needy when they're young, but they grow very quickly and sometimes eating their body weight in food every day. Precocial young, on the other hand, like many ducks and geese, they are born with downy feathers and can walk pretty much immediately. A day after birth, they're hopping around and even swimming. And so this is precocial young. They grow more slowly after birth, but they're more able to kind of be ducks rather than just monstrosities with flashlight mouths. I hope that if any transmission reaches you, it is this one, because early this morning I was wakened to a steady knock on my door. I went and opened it, and the captain was standing there looking quite upset, weary after a long night of not sleeping and trying to take care of Isabella. He came in and said that he had a confession to make. And the captain and I sat down, and he told me quite the story. And this is what he told me. I mentioned yesterday that in every human there's a little spark of desire for immortality. And in the captain, this burns especially brightly. and after fighting in the android-human wars and kind of growing to despise his role on Earth as kind of an inferior being, what the captain greatly desires is immortality and power. And he told me as he was still training for this mission, he was approached by Vector, who had that same burning desire within him for immortality. And Vector and him bonded immediately over this shared desire, the shared hatred of the androids. Together they hatched a plot so that in parallel with our mission, they had an ulterior motive. So yes, we could go explore a new planet and maybe look for a new home for humans, but while we were doing that, we could look for a specific kind of animal that would have the power to level the playing field between humans and androids, or at least make some individual humans, be given the power of immortality. Because it was rumored in Earth's past there existed an animal, a jellyfish, who was functionally immortal. This immortal jellyfish could reverse its own cell development, so it could return to an immature stage. And Vector convinced the captain that this kind of animal may exist out there in the world, out there in the universe somewhere. And the more planets we explore and the more animals we study, the better opportunity we'd have to find such an animal again. And if we could find such an animal again, they could use the modern technology that they have to reveal the secrets of life itself, of immortality. The captain and Vector, our chief engineer, agreed to simultaneously fulfill their duties as best as possible, but always be looking out for an animal who could maybe hold the key to human immortality. And once found, they would return this animal to Earth. The problem with this is these are all one-way trips because of SADS, because eventually they would get this degenerative brain disease and die. And especially on this planet, we're so far away that no one has a chance for a return journey. Eventually, they included Dave in this conspiracy too. They figured having the chief strategic officer on board would be a good idea. And Dave required little convincing, as he pretty much hates all living things, and because he's so scared of them. So in his mind, if we can find an animal and use it to make humans better, then that is really the only good animal. I asked the captain then about Dr. Mastronomer. What happened there? Is he responsible for her death? And he looked ashamed and dejected and said, yes, Dr. Mastronomer found out about their plot when Vector tried to convince her to join, and she thought that was an unethical thing to do, and she was going to tell the rest of the crew in creating a mutiny. The captain did not want that. Vector did not want that. Dave did not want that. And as she had just gotten over a pretty severe infection with Ascaris worms, they thought it was the perfect opportunity to silence her without anybody finding out. So they snuck some atracotoxin into her bloodstream and killed her, not expecting any kind of investigation, especially because Dave, the strategic officer, and the captain were the murderers, and so they could quell any investigation. Unfortunately, Master Sergeant Rush proved to be a formidable investigator and just wouldn't let it go, which is why he had to be let go. And the captain said it just kind of spiraled out of control. He didn't initially want anybody to get hurt, especially humans. That was kind of the whole point. But once you've taken a step down this dark path, it's very difficult to retrace your steps. So I asked him, why now? Why is he confessing now? And he said it's because of Isabella. Isabella needs help. She's severely injured, and it's his daughter. And that's finally kind of shocked his system enough to realize what he's doing is wrong. And here's the thing, though. They found the animal they were looking for. And when I realized it, I thought, of course, all the puzzle pieces have been right there in front of me. Vector's lab is filled wall to wall with those amphibians, the axolotls, with incredible regenerative abilities. And Vector has been working on a serum derived from the cells of the axolotl that can prevent disease and reverse aging and regenerate tissues, even brain tissues. And this should be able to cure SADS, which is a phenomenal discovery, that cells from the axolotl can reverse this degenerative brain disease. This should be a monumental achievement and something to be rejoiced. However, the captain said that Vector is using this awesome power to achieve immortality for himself. Vector's plan was to steal the navigational chart so he knows how to get back home with the serum, and then once he's on Earth in his labs, he can replicate it and manufacture it and test it, and eventually he will be immortal Vector, god of the humans. And what really made the captain change his mind is that this serum will probably be able to cure Isabella. She has a brain injury, and this axolotl serum can regenerate neurological tissue, even brain tissue. And there may be some memory loss, but her life will be saved. The problem is the captain knows if he goes to Vector about this, Vector will just kill him. So Vector, the captain needs some reinforcements, essentially. So he's willing to confess the murders in order to stop Vector from achieving his goals and leaving this planet with the serum before Isabella can be saved. So I'm on board. We went next door and got Charlie, and then we went to see Dave. And Dave didn't take too much convincing to join our side and turn away from Vector. All we had to do was threaten to send him outside with the screech owls, and he is on board. He's not really one to be trusted, but at least he's not someone we have to actively fight. So the four of us marched to Vector's habitat, and we're disappointed to find that he was missing. All his materials, his supplies, the serum was gone, and Vector is absent.